Imagine waking up one day and realizing that every single thing you were striving for didn't matter. Not in the nihilistic, hopeless way that collapses meaning into darkness, but in a liberating, air-cracking, soul-lightening way. You look at the long to-do list that once felt like a battlefield, and it no longer claws at your self-worth. You scroll past the filtered smiles of others, and their seemingly perfect lives don't ignite that silent war inside you. You're no longer chasing validation, attention, or victory over others. You're not trying to win anymore. And yet, for the first time, you begin to feel free, not just relaxed, but aware, alive. It's disorienting. You feel like you should panic, but you don't. You should want to keep climbing, outperforming, defending your reputation. But instead, something quieter stirs inside. Peace without passivity, presence without pressure. You stop caring, and suddenly everything starts to make sense. But how can this be? How can detachment, so often mistaken for apathy, be the key to deep clarity? How can giving up the game make you the only one finally playing it honestly? This is the paradox that haunted Michel de Montaigne, Renaissance philosopher, essayist, and reluctant participant in the grand theatre of human striving. His writings didn't propose a system or preach solutions. They offered something far more dangerous, freedom from the illusion that you need one. Montaigne quietly posed a question that now screams louder than ever. What if caring too much is the very thing that's keeping you from living? In a world drunk on ambition and addicted to comparison, it's considered noble to suffer for success, to worry yourself into worthiness, to anxiously mold every corner of your identity until it fits into the box of acceptability. But what if your anxiety, your discontent, your endless dissatisfaction isn't a flaw of your character, but a symptom of your over-attachment? What if you've confused intensity with meaning and obsession with purpose? We are told that caring is everything. Care more, work harder, prove yourself, be better, be someone. But Montaigne lived through plague, war, and political collapse. He watched kings fall and empires crumble, and from that wreckage he asked, what are you really trying to control when the world is chaos? What is all your effort for? He realized the more tightly we grip the illusion of control, the more we suffer, not because life is cruel, but because we are trying to bend life into something it never agreed to be. And yet we chase. We chase perfection in our relationships, clarity in our identity, prestige in our careers, and purpose in our pain. We tell ourselves, if we just care enough, plan enough, work enough, we'll arrive. But the finish line keeps moving. The goalposts dissolve. So what happens when you stop chasing? What happens when you stop trying to be impressive, stop micromanaging people's opinions, stop contorting your mind to fit into the architecture of some imaginary success? Does life collapse or does it begin? There is a subtle terror in letting go. It threatens the scaffolding that holds up your identity. If you stop striving, who are you? If you don't care what they think, what guides your actions? If you don't chase after meaning, where will you find it? This is not the silence of apathy. It is the quiet of acceptance. And that's what terrified Montaigne's contemporaries. In a time of religious dogma and political hysteria, here was a man who dared to say, I study myself more than any other subject. That is my metaphysics, that is my physics. He believed that if you look inward with honesty, not judgment, not ambition, just clarity, you might discover that your pain comes not from the world, but from your reaction to it. Could it be that the weight you feel on your chest is made of your own expectations? That your exhaustion isn't from effort, but from performing a self that was never real? You're not broken. You're overburdened by things you never needed to carry. So the question echoes, when you stop caring, why does everything finally fall into place? Because maybe it's not that life was always broken and needed fixing. Maybe it was always whole, and you just needed to stop clawing at it. The truth you were looking for was never out there. It wasn't in achievement, fame, certainty, or legacy. It was in the quiet corners of being that only show themselves when you stop chasing and start noticing. Montaigne did not abandon life. He simply stopped trying to conquer it. This is where we begin, not with answers, but with a rupture in the fabric of what you thought mattered. From this crack pours the possibility of a new kind of freedom. But it won't come cheaply, because before we can understand the liberation of not caring, we must unearth the roots of why we cared so obsessively to begin with. Why were we so desperate to matter in the first place? There's a reason you cared so much, a reason why your worth became tangled in your productivity, your relationships became battlegrounds for validation, and your inner world slowly turned into a courtroom where every thought and action stood trial. You didn't choose this. It was inherited, conditioned, etched into the grooves of your mind by centuries of thought, societal expectation, and evolutionary necessity. You were taught that your value is contingent, that to be enough, you must be something more, that your existence is not a given, but a thing to be earned. This belief is not just cultural, it's existential. Let's start with the psychological scaffolding. From childhood, your brain began to associate safety with approval. A parent's frown felt like danger. A teacher's praise felt like a shield. Your nervous system wasn't just learning math and language, it was learning survival through performance. Smile the right way, say the right thing, behave as expected, then you are safe, then you are loved. The child becomes the adult, and now, instead of parents and teachers, the audience becomes society. You must be seen, online, in the office, in your relationships to believe you exist. This is no accident. It's baked into your biology. The human brain evolved in tribes where exile meant death. Belonging wasn't a psychological luxury, it was a matter of survival. So your mind is wired to scan for social threat, disapproval, rejection, humiliation. You begin to overcorrect, to please, to chase the subtle signs that say, "You're okay now." But the standards keep shifting. You are caught in what psychologists call the hedonic treadmill, an endless cycle where each achievement gives only fleeting relief before anxiety returns, whispering, "You haven't done enough. You're not quite there." So you double down, you care more, you try harder, and you suffer deeper. Montaigne, centuries before modern psychology, sensed this spiral intimately. He observed, "My life has been full of terrible misfortunes, most of which never happened." In one sentence, he predicted the discoveries of cognitive behavioral therapy, that much of our suffering is manufactured in the mind. But where did this mental machinery come from? Philosophy has its own diagnosis. Friedrich Nietzsche declared that man is not yet a fixed being, but a bridge, always becoming, never arriving. We are haunted by our potential, tormented by the idea of what we could be, and so we grind ourselves into dust, not because we love life, but because we fear being less than what we imagine we should be. Schopenhauer went further. He believed that our constant willing, our striving, is the source of all suffering. That desire itself is a trap, keeping us always reaching, never resting. And yet desire is what we are taught to worship. To stop striving is to be seen as lazy. To release attachment is to be accused of weakness. But Montaigne saw through this charade. He withdrew not from life, but from its illusions. He retreated to his tower, not as an escape, but as an act of rebellion. While others fought for political gain or religious dominance, he chose introspection. He dared to write not to impress, but to understand himself, and in doing so, he uncovered a radical truth. We are tormented more by imagination than reality. Montaigne wasn't promoting passivity. He wasn't telling you to become indifferent. He was asking, why do you care so desperately about things that do not touch your soul? And here lies the hidden problem, the misplacement of attention. You don't suffer simply because life is hard. You suffer because your mind is fixated on things it cannot control, and your identity is fused with things that are not real. You think success will make you feel enough, but enough is not a place you reach, it's a place you remember. You think others must approve of you for you to approve of yourself, but their gaze cannot give you a mirror unless you believe what they reflect. And you think purpose must be grand, must be shouted across timelines and praised in comment sections. But Montaigne saw purpose as something quieter, something that emerges not from performance, but from presence. He wrote, The greatest thing in the world is to know how to belong to oneself. But how many of us truly do? How many of us are living a life that is actually ours and not some inherited template? This is the philosophical disease beneath modern anxiety, alienation from the self. Not just loneliness, but separation from our authentic nature, buried beneath layers of shoulds and musts, and what will they think? We confuse caring with identity. We become entangled in our roles, our personas, our achievements. We start to believe we are the job title, the relationship status, the online presence. But Montaigne reminds us these are only masks, necessary perhaps, but not you. This raises a terrifying question. If I stop caring about these things, do I disappear? Or do I finally emerge? In a world built on noise and performance, stillness becomes a threat. A mind that does not crave, a heart that does not cling, such a person cannot be manipulated. They are not useful to the economy of ego or the machinery of fear. They are free. This is why Montaigne's philosophy is dangerous, because if you internalize it, if you stop caring, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity, then nothing owns you anymore. No fear of failure, no hunger for applause, no need to be anything but what you are, here, now. But to arrive at this stillness, you must pass through fire, the fire of unlearning everything you thought made you valuable. You must sit in the discomfort of not being special. You must release the illusion of control. You must mourn the identity you constructed from other people's dreams. And from those ashes, something quieter rises. Not apathy, not indifference, but a grounded, defiant presence, a self that belongs to no one, and therefore, finally, belongs to itself. Yet the problem is not just philosophical, it is lived. It infects your relationships, your decisions, your emotional responses, your inner dialogue. And unless we examine how deeply this hidden obsession with caring rules our every move, we will never truly be free. So what does life look like when this illusion takes root? When the mind becomes enslaved to caring too much about all the wrong things? That is what we must now explore. You don't notice it at first. It begins as a whisper, a subtle unease as you scroll through updates of other people's curated triumphs, a flicker of inadequacy when someone mentions their latest success, a knot in your stomach when your message is left on read. These are not catastrophes. They are micro-fractures in your sense of self. But over time they accumulate, and you begin to live in reaction to them. This is how the hidden obsession with caring too much quietly colonizes your life, not through explosive trauma, but through invisible compromises. The self is not destroyed in a single event. It is eroded, moment by moment, through unexamined acquiescence. You adjust your tone to sound more agreeable. You suppress your truth to avoid confrontation. You pursue goals not because they resonate, but because they'll look good on a resume or a post. You smile through resentment. You nod through numbness. And all the while, you keep telling yourself, this is what I have to do. This is how the soul is buried alive, under the weight of obligations that were never yours to begin with. Psychologists call this self-alienation, the phenomenon where your inner compass becomes silenced beneath external expectations. You no longer know what you want, you only know what you should want. And in this confusion, life becomes performance. Your career becomes a role. Your relationship becomes an act. Your personality becomes a costume worn for survival. You care about the image, but not the reality. You care about being seen, but not about being known. Carl Jung warned of this trap in his work on the persona, the socially acceptable mask we wear to navigate society. But when we identify too deeply with the persona, we lose contact with the self, the raw, unfiltered core of who we are. And this loss does not go unnoticed. Your nervous system feels the disconnect. Your gut tenses when your words betray your feelings. Your chest tightens when your actions betray your values. This is not coincidence. This is your biology pleading for congruence. But instead of listening, we double down. We drink. We binge. We overwork. We distract. Anything to avoid confronting the quiet voice asking, "Who are you doing this for?" Montaigne would say, this is the price of false caring. When your concern is outsourced to others' opinions, you lose the capacity to care authentically. You become a stranger to your own interiority. And yet society rewards this. Our culture does not nurture introspection. It feeds on insecurity. It needs you to care obsessively, irrationally, neurotically, because that is what fuels the machine. You must care about being desirable, so you buy products. You must care about being right, so you adopt ideologies. You must care about being productive, so you never stop working, even when your spirit is breaking. The marketplace thrives on your discontent. Aldous Huxley in Brave New World imagined a society where pleasure was weaponized, distraction replaced depth. The populace was not oppressed by pain, but sedated by meaningless stimulation. You are not so far removed. You think you are choosing, but your choices have been quietly engineered. Your preferences are curated by algorithms. Your worth is mirrored in metrics. Your desires are colonized by comparison. So you live in a kind of trance, functional, even successful, but fundamentally unrooted. You laugh, but it doesn't echo in your chest. You win, but it doesn't settle in your bones. You love, but with one eye always watching how it looks from the outside. This is not life. It's a simulation of life. And Montaigne's radical suggestion was this: opt out. Not in anger, not in bitterness, but in clarity. Because when you care too much about the wrong things, you stop caring about the right ones. You no longer feel the sun on your face. You no longer pause at the poetry of silence. You no longer enjoy a meal unless it's photographed. You no longer trust your own experience unless it's validated. You become haunted by the idea that somewhere else someone is doing it better, and thus you are insufficient. This is the psychological cost: anxiety, depression, imposter syndrome, chronic dissatisfaction. Not because you are failing, but because the bar you are trying to reach was never yours. It was built by a society designed to keep you reaching. And here's the bitterest truth: you will never arrive. Because the moment you get close, the target shifts. What was once enough becomes inadequate. What was once authentic becomes a brand. Jean-Paul Sartre described this as bad faith. When we deny our freedom by becoming what others want us to be, we choose the comfortable lie over the terrifying truth that we are radically free and therefore radically responsible for how we live. To stop caring about the wrong things is to embrace this freedom. But it is not easy. Because false caring gives you a script, it tells you what to do, how to act, what to say. Without it, you are left with the blank page of your own life and the terrifying power to write it yourself. This is why the unseen consequences of overcaring are so pervasive. Because they allow you to avoid that power. They keep you safely caged in systems of approval, performance, and reward. But the price is steep, the death of authenticity. So ask yourself, how many of your beliefs were chosen consciously? How many of your habits serve your soul? How many of your goals are actually your own? These questions do not yield easy answers, but they open the door to something rare: sovereignty of the self. Montaigne did not have it all figured out. That was his genius. He knew that to be human was not to conquer life, but to become increasingly honest about its mystery. And honesty begins with this: most of what you care about is not worth caring about. Not because it's meaningless, but because it was never yours to carry. So what happens when you stop carrying it? Not just intellectually, but viscerally. When you loosen your grip on the script. When you stop negotiating your worth through others' eyes. When you walk away, not from life, but from the illusion of who you're supposed to be. Then, and only then, does something incredible begin. Not success, not fame, not comfort, but clarity. The fog begins to lift. And for the first time, you see not what the world wants you to be, but who you already are. This is the first spark of rebellion. But what does that rebellion look like? How do you live in a world designed to manipulate your attention without becoming a ghost to your own potential? How do you break free? The rebellion doesn't begin with rage. It begins with a whisper that says, no more. No more apologizing for your peace. No more chasing after gold stars in someone else's sky. No more mistaking visibility for value. No more crafting yourself into a product to be consumed, liked, rated, or retweeted. This isn't a violent uprising, it's a quiet refusal. Not a refusal to live, but a refusal to live falsely. To break free from the tyranny of caring too much is not to become passive. It is to reclaim your authority, not over others, but over your own attention. Michel de Montaigne did not launch revolutions or lead armies. He withdrew. He stepped back from the noise, the pageantry, the political theater, and he turned inward. Not as an escape, but as a confrontation. He asked, what if the greatest act of rebellion is to be content with oneself, even when the world insists you shouldn't be? This is where the real war lies, not in defeating some external enemy, but in overcoming the part of you that still believes you are not enough, without proof. So how do you break free? Start with this: reclaim your inner narrative. You've been living under a story authored by others, parents, teachers, society, the ghost of perfection. The first step is to pause long enough to hear that story. What are the thoughts that pass through your mind on repeat? I have to succeed. If I don't try harder, I'll fall behind. Once I prove myself, I can finally rest. If they don't like me, I must not be worth liking. These aren't truths, they're inherited scripts. And you are under no obligation to keep reciting them. You must become an editor of your own mind, and editing requires discernment, the courage to distinguish your voice from the echoes of the crowd. The rebellion begins in the small choices. Choosing stillness over stimulation. Choosing silence over performance. Choosing authenticity over approval. It is not dramatic, it is not glamorous, but it is radical. Because it dismantles the very mechanism that modern life runs on, your unconscious compliance. To rebel is to see clearly, and clarity requires solitude. Montaigne's tower was not a retreat from life, but a return to it. He surrounded himself not with power or fame, but with books, thoughts, and time. Time to reflect, time to notice, time to wonder without pressure. In today's world, solitude is nearly extinct. We fill every gap with noise, notifications, podcasts, updates, scrolling. Not because we're curious, but because we're terrified of facing our own unscripted self. But here's the paradox. You cannot find yourself until you are willing to be alone with yourself. That means carving out space, physically, emotionally, spiritually, where you are not performing, not reacting, not editing. Just being. This is not easy, because when the distractions fade, the buried voices emerge. The shame, the fear, the longing, the untended grief. But those voices are not your enemies. They are parts of you that have been neglected in your endless chase to be enough. Listening to them is an act of rebellion. Tending to them is an act of love. From this foundation, a deeper transformation can begin, a shift in what you value. We were trained to seek the extraordinary, but Montaigne's genius was in seeing the divine in the ordinary. He did not write grand treatises on cosmic law. He wrote about sleeping habits, the randomness of mood swings, how his horse made him feel more himself than politics ever could. He was reclaiming reality from abstraction. And that is your task too. To rediscover the sacred in the unspectacular. To eat a meal without documenting it. To have a conversation without performing. To feel your breath without trying to optimize it. These are not spiritual cliches. They are acts of resistance against a culture that teaches you to monetize, aestheticize, or hack everything, including your own presence. And once you shift your values from performance to presence, the world begins to look different. You begin to care, not less, but differently. You no longer care about being impressive, you care about being real. You no longer care about being liked, you care about being true. You no longer care about winning, you care about meaning, not abstract meaning, but lived meaning. This is the great reversal. You once believed that caring was the path to worth. Now you see that worth was never dependent on caring so much. Your value is not increased by your anxiety. Your depth is not measured by your suffering. Your purpose is not validated by your productivity. It always existed, It was simply buried beneath the noise. And now that you're quiet, you can hear it again. So what does life look like on the other side? You walk slower. You speak less but with more weight. You spend more time with fewer people, and the connections are richer. You create, not to impress, but to express. You listen to your intuition, not as a mystic force, but as an ancient intelligence whispering through your nervous system. You feel at home in your own skin. And in this state, the things that once consumed you begin to dissolve. Jealousy fades because you're no longer in the race. Perfectionism dissolves because you're not trying to manufacture worth. Fear shrinks because there's nothing left to defend. This is not the path of apathy, it is the path of integrity. To stop caring is not to become numb. It is to become so alive that you refuse to waste one more breath performing a life that isn't yours. You are not here to impress a God you don't believe in. You are not here to win a game you never chose to play. You are not here to manage perceptions or manufacture desirability. You are here to be here. As Montaigne wrote, "The greatest thing in the world is to know how to belong to oneself." This is the revolution. It starts with attention. It deepens with awareness. And it culminates in authenticity. But there is one final threshold left to cross. Because beyond rebellion, beyond even freedom, lies a truth more unsettling and more beautiful than any you've encountered so far. The truth that changes everything. Here it is. The final door. The ultimate truth. The truth you've been circling, resisting, aching toward. It will not flatter you. It does not offer certainty, or a blueprint, or a triumphal finale. But it does something more valuable. It dissolves the illusion you didn't know you were drowning in. And it begins with this. Greater than there is nothing to fix. You are not broken. You are not behind. You are not a problem to be solved or a project to be completed. You were never supposed to be anything more than what you are, a living, breathing paradox, a consciousness held together by contradictions, both fearful and fearless, both lost and luminous, both vast and vanishing. This is what Montaigne realized after years of watching kings fall and empires rot, after witnessing plagues reduce cities to whispers, after watching his best friend die and the meaning he clung to crumble beneath the weight of silence. He did not become cynical, he became clear. Clear that no grand narrative could contain the fullness of human life. Clear that no ideology, no dogma, no success could make sense of the mystery that is being. Clear that the self is not something to construct, but something to observe. This is the final liberation. Greater than you do not have to matter. To matter is already to be caught in comparison. What if your value has nothing to do with your impact, your influence, your accomplishments? What if being is the miracle and everything else is noise? You've been trained to fear this realization. You've been told that without ambition you are nothing. That without proving yourself you are invisible. That without achievement your life is wasted. But Montaigne's philosophy whispers the opposite. That the obsession with being important is a form of self-erasure. Because in your frantic race to matter, you bypass the truth that you already do, not because of what you produce, but because you exist at all. Can you feel it? That subtle release in your chest when you imagine no longer having to defend your worth? That breath you didn't know you were holding, exhaled not in defeat, but in recognition? This is not nihilism. This is freedom beyond meaning. Because the final truth is this. Greater than, life does not need to be understood to be lived. The need for everything to make sense is the last prison. We tell ourselves, if I can just figure it out, I'll finally be at peace. But peace is not the product of understanding, it is the byproduct of surrender. Surrender to the ordinary. Surrender to the mystery. Surrender to the self, not as a fixed identity, but as a fluctuating field of awareness, always shifting, never graspable. He wanted a final answer, that there isn't one. There never was. There is only this moment, this breath, this heartbeat. And in that realization, something dissolves. Not your purpose, but your compulsion. Not your fire, but your fear. The fear that if you don't care enough, you'll disappear. The fear that if you don't prove yourself, you'll never be loved. The fear that if you stop striving, life will pass you by. But now you see, life was always here, waiting for you to stop running from it. And in its quiet arms, you discover something wild. Greater than. When you stop caring, everything falls into place. Not because the world changes, but because you are finally still enough to see how whole it already was. You no longer need to micromanage your destiny. You no longer need to dominate your fear. You no longer need to curate your worth. You simply live with your contradictions, with your uncertainties, with your ordinary sacred humanness. And from this place, action arises, not from panic, but from presence. You work, but without ego. You love, but without clinging. You speak, but without pretending. And when suffering returns, as it inevitably will, you no longer resist it as proof that something is wrong. You meet it with spaciousness. You greet it as part of the human mosaic, not as a failure of your philosophy. You stop searching for invincibility, and instead you find intimacy. Intimacy with life as it is, not as you were taught to want it. This is Montaigne's final offering, not a system, but a shift. Not a method, but a mirror. Not a map, but a posture of presence. It is the courage to sit in the middle of chaos and whisper, even here, I am enough. And so the question becomes, do you dare to let go? Will you risk disappointing the world to become real? Will you trust that your life, without embellishment, without justification, is already a kind of poetry? Because once you do, you'll begin to see what Montaigne saw. Greater than that freedom is not the ability to do whatever you want. Greater than freedom is no longer needing to become anyone else. And once you realize that, the final paradox reveals itself. You stopped caring, and only then did you begin to live. Let me know if you'd like a compiled version of the full long-form script, or if you'd like it formatted for video, audio, or publishing.